Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge, break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage, which, if you with patient ears shall attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. Now, it's been about 10 years since I got to give that monologue. I used to be a Shakespearean actor a bit, and that is my favorite opening monologue to any Shakespearean play. Romeo and Juliet? Everyone agree that's Romeo and Juliet? Messed it up a little tiny bit. Well, that's the character of the chorus, and the chorus is traditionally in the theatrical world a omnipotent, omniscient narrator who is perfect. He does not lie to us, or she, except that in Romeo and Juliet, the narrator is lying to you. What is Romeo and Juliet about?
Two star-crossed lovers.
Two star-crossed lovers. Anyone else?
Mostly hormones, right?
Especially if you read it in high school, yeah? Well, it's about all that, but it's also about peer pressure. It's about the role of women in society. It's about the corrupting influence of politics on art. It's about religion's relationship to a perfect divinity and the way that people actually live. It's about what happens when our society, and especially parents, fail children. And those are some very subtle themes that weren't lost on Shakespeare's audience, what he was writing for at the time. And his audience was really interesting. It ranged from like people who were just barely on the bottom of middle class society all the way up to royalty. And one of the structural tricks that Shakespeare uses to make his plays accessible to his audience was this idea of the shifting viewpoint that cuts across class and societal role. And this allows us to see the same situation presented again and again through different lenses of different observers, different characters in the world of the play. We're told the tale of Romeo and Juliet primarily through the teens. They are the observers, they're the actors, those who are actually acting and causing events to happen. But we also see the play through the eyes of Juliet's nurse, who, in her role as surrogate mother, is encouraging this 13-year-old girl to have a love affair. That's kind of crazy. Friar Lawrence, the monk who helps them and like supplies the poison and everything, he's also a surrogate parent figure. But the only reason he's helping the two of them hook up is he's hoping to clean up the mean streets of Verona and restore the influence of the church. Benvolio and Mercutio, two very favorited characters by most teenage boys who get forced to play it, are sexually experienced role models who are also street thugs who taunt and tease Romeo and basically bully him into having a sexual relationship with Juliet. But ultimately, they just see his little love affair as a trifle against the politics of what's going on between these two families. So, is Romeo and Juliet just about star-crossed lovers and hormones? Is it a sad tale of how love, raging against all odds, really doesn't conquer all? Is it a cautionary tale about how the fire of youth dims in all of us, and as adults, we need to nourish that flame when we see it in others and ourselves? Shakespeare uses this technique of having other characters from different class roles, different genders, and different societal stations examining the events. We often see commoners commenting on what's going on in the play, saying, man, can you believe these crazy royals, what they're doing? That allows him to connect and show the same situation and examine it from different positions within society, rather than merely being the presented opinion of the upper crust. It allows these characters to communicate across these gulfs of class and life. And although the characters themselves might be unable to change the lens, it allows us to continually change our lens and have a greater understanding. And that's one of the geniuses of Shakespeare that his contemporaries just didn't have. They wrote better poetry in some examples, but he was a humanist, and he believed in the divinity of the human over the divinity of any given solid truth. Now, if you can't tell, before I was a developer, I was a performing arts major. I once appeared in 3 Shakespearean plays simultaneously, as a messenger in all 3. That's fun when you mess up which play you're in. You tell Macbeth all about what's going on in Rome. Usually you cover by saying, "Oh, but my lord, you care not for that." I covered by saying, "Oh shit." I work for Living Social right now, where I am a heavy metal software developer. It's right there in my title. Yeah. Tender Love's not here, people. You got me. I'm also on the unfortunately named Culture Committee, which I'm hoping to change the name of, especially after the wonderful talk yesterday about the destructive nature of names in culture. The Culture Committee reminds me of some sort of like Soviet-era 5-year plan. That's literally me. I'm literally that. Before I came to Ruby, though, I've been a Rubyist for about 6 years. But before I came to Rails, I was a Perl developer, and then I was a poker player for a year, and then I got into PHP, so you can see that downward moral slide. And while PHP has really outgrown its double-clawed hammer reputation that it earned at the time, 6 years ago when I made the switch, it was still kind of a hodgepodge. It was still kind of a messy language. There weren't a lot of great patterns and libraries to use. So let's take a pretty simple case where the sales guy comes to me and says, "I need a report. I need all the users. I need the name, email, and birthday of all the users named William." Anyone ever write PHP? Everyone close your eyes. Now, who wrote PHP? A few more hands. That's great. So I set up, I write a query here, and then I'm actually going to make the query, kind of. And this looks pretty, oh wait, no, I've got to do error checking. Right, okay, this looks a lot like Rails, and then, oh yeah, like I better let MySQL know that I'm done talking to it. I had to do all that manually. So imagine how excited I was when I could just write that, and it just magically worked. Right? ActiveRecord is this amazing, amazing thing, and every time I have to read through its documentation, and that happens a lot more than you might want to admit, I discovered that ActiveRecord is capable of something new, like there's some new corner or edge case that it does. And it does these things that I forget, because all I really concentrate on is CRUD operations, right? Select some things, inject some things, maybe delete something. And I forget about all the other things that I used to use databases for when I had to hand write and hand tune every SQL query on my own. ActiveRecord, as great as it is, though, kind of leads us to a problem. Because what if every carpenter in the world only had a hammer? What would we end up building? I think I have to say that Living Social is in fact hiring. We have a lot of barns. They're not all this bad though. But usually what we build ends up not being quite this bad, obviously, right? And this isn't bad, right? This is a pretty good barn. I mean, what does a barn have to do, right? It has to keep you dry and keep you out of the wind. And I guess the roof is mostly whole here. It's not rusted out. And that one wall is all thing. And if the wind comes, that's probably the hurricane side, right? Y'all know about hurricanes. I don't know a thing about hurricanes. They're a drink. I don't know. But if a big wind does come, we'll just slap up some boards on that side and call it good. And then, if we need a door, we'll add a door, and it'll be great, right? ActiveRecord is an awesome, awesome hammer, and it's got some cool Swiss Army tools on it. But because it's so great, we as an industry, at least the Ruby community, part of the industry, have kind of forgotten some of the cool things that databases can do for us, that they're designed to do by default. And those are things that we could be using to build more solid applications. So without any other further ado, let's get started. This is my talk. I can't believe you guys don't find this funny. I love this book. I've given it to people, and this is my favorite. This is my favorite panel from it. It's great. It's like a Sailor Moon episode about SQL. So one of the favorite things though that I love about relational databases, one of the features that we tend to forget about are views. And that's the traditional definition of what a view is. If you go to Wikipedia, as of this morning, that is the definition. And I don't know what the frick that means. I'm sorry, can I curse? Is that okay? I just got you're responsible, can I?
Yeah.
I don't know what the flip that does. Strong language. But basically, a view is a table that exists in memory rather than disk. It is a table that isn't the result of a bunch of inserts and deletes, but is a result of a query. And it's a specific query that you program ahead of time. It's a lot like going to a restaurant and ordering a number 3 instead of saying, I'm going to have this and this and this and this, right? It's a shortcut, stored ahead of time. You could think of it as a named query, like you have named scopes and named routes that are shortcuts. This is a named query. So if we had this as a data set, La Fiche down here on the bottom isn't doing so well. But damn, I want to go to Grillanium Falcon now. So if I've got this pretty basic data model, right? And I want to print all the restaurants, their regions, and their annual sales. We do something like this in ActiveRecord, right? What's the problem with this? Exactly. This is an n+1 situation where I make the query to get all of the restaurants, and then every single time I loop over this, now I've got to go query out to find the region for that restaurant, creating n+1 queries in my database. So I can solve that. That's actually pretty easy, right? We do this all day long. So now Rails will load up all the regions as well as all the restaurants. But what if I also have a managers table, and I want to join that in as well, so I can list, say, all of the managers at a store. Say they've got assistant managers and head managers, and I want to list that. Well, I keep growing this, I keep growing this include, and pretty soon, that's like 5 different tables I'm joining on. That's a mess. And what happens if I've got, say, 50 restaurants, 10 regions, and 100 managers? What happens then? You get this in your log. This is actually these are 5 different queries that are getting executed against your database. Every single one of those potentially locks or eats up resources or something else blocks because we've got other applications that are trying to execute queries. This is the good version, right? And sometimes you see it like this. And this is the one that your DBA calls you up in a panic at 2 a.m. saying, you're breaking everything. Production's down. Oh no. So you can have 5 potentially good queries or 1 completely unreadable one that you got to run, and they're kind of slow. And what happened to your object graph during all this? So if you recall, I said we have 50 restaurants and 10 regions and 100 managers. Well, now I've just added 160 objects plus all the objects for all of their names and titles and phone numbers, and who knows, maybe managers are automatically joining up and including their addresses, their home phone number, because someone decided way back in the midst of time that was important, so now I've loaded up every single address for them, both their billing and shipping, because we have billing and shipping now for our you see how this spirals out of control really, really quickly. So this is a lot of memory and CPU we're chewing through just as if it was free. So views, on the other hand, execute their predefined query, in this case loading up just what we need, the restaurant's name, the region, the assistant managers, gathers all that up, and it saves it as a table and returns that to us. So instead of getting back 160 objects that we're storing up in memory, we have to parse over and go through, we get back simply 50 objects in memory. And ActiveRecord actually supports this out of the box because a view is a table. It's a virtual table, but it's just like a table. You can create them in migrations. You can add indexes to them. And this is a bit of a mess of SQL, but by storing this in the database, we isolate it to where it can be optimized by the database engine itself instead of worrying about Ruby and like, oh, how do I get the performance of Ruby to get better here? Maybe I can do it in pieces, maybe I can do it in parts. Yeah. And we do this to get cleaner code in the Ruby because that's where we're going to be interacting with it. And we get a slimmer memory footprint, and we don't sacrifice the oh goodness that we've come to expect. And Demeter is happy. And since we're making a new object to be backed by this view, again, a virtual table, we've got an object, restaurant region manager report. We can add methods to do transformations, and records, and after callbacks, and all that sort of business that we would normally do with an ActiveRecord object. So we get back to this. We get back to concentrating on solving the problem that we have at hand rather than figuring out how to solve the problem or worrying about the technique. I know what you're saying, but Kerri, that's a query, and now I've tied my application to my database. How often do you change databases? How often do you just like wake up on a Tuesday and be like, this Postgres, hear a lot of good things about that MySQL. I mean, that never happens, right? But we don't change databases as much as we think that we do. As much as we claim that we want that sort of flexibility, we just don't do it, right? So a view is a named query. And I know what someone else is thinking, which is that I know what you're all thinking all the time. But there's another person out there who's thinking that, that's just a query, and I have to run that very expensive query, so there's not a real big advantage. Well, that's where materialized views come in, which is a very fancy word for saying that the content of the view, rather than being updated whenever you call it, like rewriting that query and returning it, is basically cached. The database, whenever one of the underlying tables gets updated, say we add a new restaurant, or we updated sales, or hire a new manager, every time that changes, we update the contents in memory of that view. So it's always hot, piping fresh, more or less. And it's very, very fast to access because it's just simply 50 rows of text instead of joining and scanning and all that business. So views can really, really speed up things. I use them a lot with reports when I'm building business intelligence applications. That nightly email you have to, the nightly cron job that writes the email to tell the salespeople how much commission they didn't earn that day. Materialized views are your friend. I like this rabbit a lot. How many people saw a rabbit? Did everybody else see a duck? Oh man, maybe if I flip it around. This is the rabbit duck. This was an image that appeared in an 1800s comedy magazine, for lack of a better word, in Germany. And Wittgenstein stole it and wrote extensively about it in his book, Philosophical Investigations. And he discussed this idea of figures that can be seen and understood in two different ways, and how weird that is. You can see something in a very straightforward way. If we see this as a rabbit, for example, it's a rabbit. And then something weird happens in our brain, and we say, oh, it's a duck. Right? This happens with every single optical illusion, right? You see it one way, you see the old woman, then you see the young woman, or you see the horse, and then you see the frog, or all those famous ones, right? But has the object actually changed itself? That's a really strange thing, where now we've got a dichotomy between the outside world and the inside world. And the world that exists in our head has just changed, and suddenly the meaning of this, is it a duck or is it a rabbit? It's both. It's now much richer to our imaginations, and it has more utility once we can see that. This represents also the idea of functional fixedness, which we talk about in cognitive psychology. The common example of that being, you all know about the Titanic? I showed a picture of Leo DiCaprio. I mean, you know the Titanic movie, right? Okay, you see, okay. Everybody jumps off the ship, right? Because the ship was sinking. Why didn't they get on the iceberg? The iceberg was floating. It's right there. Why didn't they get on the frickin' iceberg? Functional fixedness. You don't think about the iceberg as something that's floating that can save you. It's, I've got to be in a ship. I'm on the water. When you see a tool, whether it's a database or a gem or a framework or something, and then you can see it in a different light, you can see a different use for it. When you realize that your hammer is also really good for holding open doors, now it's a richer tool. When you see that a screwdriver also makes a pretty damn good pry bar, and if you're in a pinch, I've never done this, you could jam it across two things in your car to jumpstart it if the starter's not working correctly. You could use it as a fuse. You could jam it into a fuse box. As a journeyman member of IATSE, the Stagehands Union, don't do that. We never do that. Hampton, are you still here by any chance? I saw this. I was like, this is so cool. This is great. I just stood out. I like staring at it. I'm staring at it, and I'm like, why did they hang it on the side? Does anyone know why they hung it sideways? I flipped it so it's right side up. Why? Anyone see that? It's not on its side. It's right side up. It's just the foot. It's the reflection of Ponce de Leon. But it's our functional fixedness around this idea that it's a human figure and it needs to be upright because it's not dead and he's not sleeping. So clearly this is hung sideways. Sorry, Hampton, I'm sorry. I'm gonna burst your bubble on this one. That's functional fixedness. Let me move on. Stored procedures. Most SQL that you encounter is very declarative in nature, right? It's like insert this or grab, select that or delete that other thing. Create a table. For the most part, we're just using our persistence layers for data injection and retrieval. But it can do so much more. We usually do data transformation in our application. Storage procedures can do data transformation for us in the database engine in efficient ways. And it can be conditionally reactive to other data that's in the database that we're not actually retrieving. That make any sense to anybody? So you combine these with a materialized view, and suddenly you've got this really super high performant view level of complex data for simply the low cost of tightly bundling your application to the database, which, as I already said, is great. You could write your entire application, in fact, inside of your database that way. It's kind of a trade-off. A lot of people have done it. We used to do it a lot in the Oracle world. We used to do a lot of Oracle, Amazon. We did all sorts of weird, complex stored procedures in the database, and it was kind of magic. It was kind of magic. So you have to really figure out where you want to put your logic. The benefit is you're often going to improve performance. I've seen performance of doing something in Postgres versus doing it in Ruby an order of magnitude faster. Now, granted, Ruby's pretty fast, but when you're talking like 100 milliseconds down to 10, that's pretty great. That's 90 seconds my JavaScript front-end devs can waste. That's great. So really, again, the cost of these sort of procedures, right, is now we have to write in two different languages, and we're splitting our application code and testing across two different programming paradigms. Postgres, I'll talk a lot about Postgres, mostly because I'm a Postgres advocate. Postgres has its own internal language for this called PL/PG/SQL. That's kind of annoying. So they also support TCL, Perl, and Python natively. You can just send it random strings of that, and it'll work. There's third-party support for PHP, Java, Scheme, Ruby, and JavaScript. And I do know what you're thinking. Yes, you can in fact insert your entire Node.js application into a stored procedure and have it execute in Postgres, and it will return a result. Who are you people? Right? Cans are not shoulds. Okay, so how do you actually do that, right? How do you actually run some of that stuff? Here's an actual example using JavaScript, where we create a function. We say we're going to use the PL V8. It has actually the V8 JavaScript engine in there, and just run this bullshit, and data comes back as JSON. Oh, come on, it's Trigger. It's you know, Roy Rogers, Trigger, and the dog Bullet, and this happy guy. Might have been his name, I don't know. Anyway, triggers. Triggers are something else we talk about a lot in the database world. A trigger is a SQL command that's automatically executed by the server when certain database actions happen, generally insert, updates, and deletes. They're active record callbacks in our database. You can do before and after any insert, update, or delete. That's pretty cool. So this is a stored procedure to update the log table when someone makes a purchase. We say, hey, this is a stored procedure. It says, well, whatever, I'm naming this thing, and whenever I call a log purchase, I want you to do this other little bit of SQL, which is insert into logs, a bunch of BS. And here's the actual trigger itself. We say, after insert on purchases, for each row, execute this procedure, which just updated that log. That is super powerful because I hate debugging after record callbacks. After update, and then it does a whole bunch of like, well, send something to the log and write this other thing and note down that the user, and you're saving, you're doing all these other extra queries that you don't need to be doing. You don't need to be doing it in the Ruby. Do it in the database layer where it's faster. You're not doing back and forth network communication. You're not hogging up resources that your other applications could be using. Something else that I'm really super excited about are data types, because I'm a nerd. Out of the box, this is a list of all of the active record data types that are listed in the current Edge Rails documentation. This is actually not a complete list, but this is all they tell you about, and this is all pretty much you've seen. Most every application that we work with, especially if we're doing web-based applications that are dealing with basically chunks of text, right? We classify them into these different buckets. But I've got a super awesome one I love called arrays. Those are solar arrays, but it's just, tough room. So let's pretend that we're building another application because they loved our restaurant reporting. It was so fast. So we want to build an e-commerce platform system. We want to sell shirts. We want to let all these different shirt retailers up and down George Street here, we want to let them just arbitrarily access our API. And we can reasonably expect merchants to have standardized categories or classes of data about their products, like name, price, current inventory, and the item's description, right? That's pretty normal. It's pretty normal. And this fits really nicely into a lot of the active record data types that we normally see. But what if someone wants to upload a list of all the colors of shirts that they offer? Now, I've seen a lot of people do this with a relational table, but maybe like blue gets spelled differently, and then we're in a mess, a whole heap of trouble, and like we've got raspberry, magenta, all the different colors for red, you know? This is kind of a problem. A lot of people just accept a common delimited list. Say, here you go, here's all this business. And if you want to actually pick out all the colors of this shirt, you got to do some BS like this. And of course, you can put it behind an initializer, or you can have some sort of method that splits it apart on the model, but it's still ugly and ungainly. And what if we want to search for everything that has blue in it? Well, now we're doing full text searches across database columns, and I see some nodding out there of people who like have scars on the inside about this. Well, Postgres' awesome array data type solves this case for us. So here I'm just grabbing a product where I've added those colors as an array data type, and you can see here, it's an array. Postgres knows about arrays. You can save something as an array, and then Ruby and Rails Active Record, that whole mishmash, says, oh, that's an array. I'm going to make that an array. That's really super handy. Super, super handy. And if I want to search on it, that's a little ugly. I don't really like that, but that's SQL for you. I could just simply pass in an array and I can search. You can see here, it found one product that has the color red in there. And if I want to find everything that has all the products that are offered in red and blue, I can do that as well. Anyone see the cool thing that's going on here, though? Probably not, because this is a whole wall of text. Oh, hey, there you are. It's not order dependent, because Postgres is indexing that array as an actual array, as a data structure itself, not simply as a text string. So it doesn't matter the order of the objects I look for in that array. I can look for blue, red, blue, red, green, red. It doesn't matter. It'll still return that one thing. And I think that's pretty cool. It is really ugly to work with, especially that ampersand greater than. So you could set it up as scopes, which is pretty easy. No one thinks this is cool? Does anyone think this is cool? Yes. Who thinks this isn't cool? If you don't think it's cool, I don't know. Just your monkey. This is all you have to do to add it. That's all you have to do. You just say, oh, it's an array, and its default is an empty array. That's it. Something else I did on this, I realized afterwards. I'm making an index. I'm saying I'm using the gin method. There's two methods in Postgres anyway, gin and gist. We always say, oh, don't index. That's really tough for every time you insert, that's really expensive. Gin is best for static data because it does better, faster lookups, but gist is better for when you have data that's changing a lot. You're going to be doing a lot of inserts. You can use this different technique. You still get 90% of the benefit of having an index, less of the downsides. So that's arrays. What if we wanted to show the inventory for each color? It kind of sounds like a hash, doesn't it? I don't know. I searched for hash in HStore, and this is the first image result I got, so I figure I'm behind the times. Anyway, Postgres knows about hashes. ActiveRecord also supports it. We have to actually do like a create extension here to like enable it onto our Postgres. But hey, look at that. I can just add it, and I'm defining it as an HStore column because ActiveRecord knows about it. ActiveRecord doesn't tell you about it, but it's there. And then I can really do this wonderful thing where I say color inventory, stabby arrow, key blue has the value of 0. Or key blue is greater than 0. So I can search across all of the keys that exist in that hash. That's really, really cool. And I know what you're thinking. We're coming up on Mongo territory now, aren't we? Problem is that HStore can't nest objects, and it stores everything actually as text. So we're actually end up kind of doing some processing on the back end. We're doing full text searching. If we actually want to do JSON, we can. It's so great. I'm really sad Hampton's not here. I included this for Hampton because this is something else that happened in 2008. This album came out. This is like some dude's mixtape. I don't know. I think he's really intense. Okay, boom. So there, boom, JSON as a data type. You can have a column that just is like, JSON's going to be in here. It's going to be well-formed. If it's not well-formed JSON, database blows up. But you can store JSON in a relational table. You don't need Mongo if you've got Postgres. I'm very proud of my doing that, people. With a single arrow, for searching like that, you can actually get back a JSON, a Ruby JSON object. If you use the double stabby arrow there, you can actually get back a text string. I don't know why you'd want that. I am not you. Apparently, I don't actually need this slide. Sometimes I actually have to lead people to this, but it seems like a good number you had that. But if you didn't understand why that's good, here's why. Postgres is an ACID database. It has certain guarantees about the integrity of its data. When it says something is written, it's written. When I say I'm going to delete something, I delete it. It follows the ACID or ACID protocol of databases. Mongo does not. So if you need to do document storage, but you also have relational data, you don't have to compromise one way or the other. You can combine the two. And these are good things. This is peanut butter and chocolate territory, people. And there's more. Range, money, composites. This is cool. You can get back a Ruby range. Money, you can do money calculations in your database, even for non-decimal money systems, like if you're dealing with shillings or something. I don't really know. Enums are really super cool. They're the drop-down select box of a column. You say, hey, column, I'm only ever going to put open, closed, and pending into you. And if I try to put something else into you, blow up. That's super cool for status fields. It's really cool for employee roles, anything like that, where you want to have human readable data, but you want to limit what could possibly go into that column. IP addresses. I worked for a hosting company one time. We used MySQL, which does not have an IP data type. So we stored all of our IP addresses for all of our different servers as, you guessed it, text strings. How do you sort things? How do you search for what's in this particular subnet? Well, you can with Postgres. You can't with MySQL, unfortunately. Postgres out of the box can create UUIDs for you. It also does geospatial records and calculations. I found it super important. I spent a long time working for a sports company that did stuff with GPS to find out, like, you were awesome over here and someone else was awesome over here. How far apart are 2 points on that map? Well, it turns out if you're using latitude and longitude to record where on the planet Earth something is, it is not as simple as drawing a straight line. It actually requires trigonometry to tell how far apart 2 latitude-longitude points are because of the curvature of the Earth. Postgres handles that for you. You can just say, give me everything within 50 miles, and it figures out the weird oblong egg that would result in. So those are some of the cool things that we forget because we're using texts and strings and integers all the time. Anyone know who this is? Hazard a guess. He died before this city was founded. Yes, it is Richard III. In fact, he was buried yesterday. Anyone know that? Yeah, apparently the story is that everyone's always said, oh yeah, we buried him after this big battle where he was killed, and then we dug up his body, to add insult to injury, and threw his bones in this river. And they found his body buried under a parking lot 2 or 3 years ago. And they conclusively proved, yes, this is in fact, the evil hunchback. And they just reburied him yesterday with honors in a church in Lister. So Richard III. Richard III is the villain and star of Shakespeare's play of the same name. Anyone familiar with it? You might know it from A Horse, a Kingdom for My Horse. You might know it from this opening line. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. This is really wonderful. This is a wonderful little couplet here. Now is the winter of our discontent. He's using the royal hour, right? He's talking about his family. Made glorious summer by this son of York. The interplay of winter and sun and summer. It's seasonal. But what he's really talking about is his cousin Clarence, who is a son, S-O-N, of York. And in fact, depending on which edition of Shakespeare you go back to, which folio, all through the 1700s when we're reprinting this stuff, the spelling of S-U-N versus S-O-N will change depending on who the editor was. This is a pun that Shakespeare's making about this evil man. And he is evil, make no mistake about it. He goes on in this monologue to talk about how now that the war's over, everyone's hanging out with their ladies and how we're dancing for the women now and putting on our fancy airs. But he's a hunchback and ugly and has a hair lip and is just generally evil. He's kind of the Loki of this world. Since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasure of these days. Plots I have laid, inductions dangerous by drunken prophecies, libels, and dreams, to set my brother Clarence against the king, in deadly hate the one against the other. And if King Edward, as true and just as I am subtle, false, and vindictive, and treacherous, this day should Clarence closely be mewed up about a prophecy which says, G of Edward's heirs, and the murderer shall be. He's telling the audience right flat out, I'm an asshole. And I'm tricking everybody to fight against each other because they're good. And that's what they do. They fight injustice and plot and treachery. So I'm going to give them something to fight about. And then I'm going to come in behind and clean up. Now, we could see Richard simply as the villain that he's written to be. And he's one of the most compelling villains in all of Shakespeare. Usually Shakespeare's villains are kind of caricatures of evil. They've got like, twirling mustaches, and like, but we really see the inner life of this guy in Shakespeare. And you can understand him as just a snarling villain. You'd be well rewarded. It's a really compelling piece of English literature. But if you understand the deeper context of what Shakespeare's writing, he's writing Richard III as a piece of history for the winning side of this battle. The current royalty won the War of the Roses and beat Richard's family. Shakespeare is trying to curry favor with the current ruling class by showing their eminent enemy, who died only like 100 years before, as a total jerk. He's fitting in and trying to get some political points with the upper crust. Shakespeare knows what he's doing. Shakespeare actually was arrested for hoarding grain during a famine? He was a cold-blooded marketeer. You see, beyond what's in front of you, that's an amazing skill to cultivate, and it's critical to being an engineer. Has anyone come across the magic shop here in town? Magic. They made the store disappear. Amazing. I wish I'd taken a photo of it, but on the front door, there's a sign that says, open 11 to 6 p.m., come inside and see the magic. And if you go in, you peer in, it's empty. The shop's empty. There's no magic. There's no magic in that store. And there's no magic in what we do. And that is a common thing that I'm saying over and over again to everybody I meet. We think there's magic. And part of the reason that we think there's magic is this. Let me start with some math. Does everyone agree that this is a pony? I know, I promise no ponies. I can't not. Now we have 2 ponies, correct? 1 pony plus 1 pony equals 2 ponies. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Is that it? Can we agree to that?
Sure.
Here's your homework. I don't know why you're laughing. This is just a simple extension of what we've been talking about. This is how we talk about software. This is how we teach it. If you pick up a book on software and you have only a cursory introduction to the topic, this is what it looks like. It feels like magic. And so we tend to reach for these abstractions. Man, SQL is hard. Oh, ActiveRecord, sweet, I don't have to write SQL anymore. But we lose some subtlety, we lose some meaning, we lose some of that magic of what's lying beneath the surface. This was my favorite book when I was a kid. I've replaced it like twice now as an adult. This is from Richard Scarry's What Do People Do All Day? He wrote this whole series of children's books, which were basically these exploded diagrams of cool things. He did one about, about a bakery, about making a road, what a cruise ship is like inside. And well, first of all, I just love these little characters. These are so cool. But you can see that, like, he's actually showing inside of the walls, like, you could follow where the sewage goes, and like where the hot air is coming up here and the cold air comes down. You can't see it, but there's a furnace down here. And it strips away the magic of seeing a room as merely 4 walls, as a cube, as a building being merely a collection of cubes, a city merely being a collection of buildings which are collections of cubes. And it says, look at all of the stuff that's underneath there. This looks insane. This is a plot diagram or theme diagram for Romeo and Juliet. This is crazy. But that is nothing compared to Rails. I can't even fit this chart. Look at this. I can't even fit this chart on this. I had to spin it sideways, much like that painting. This is a mind map that friends of mine in Seattle did of everything you need to know to be considered a competent Rails developer. Who here is 10 for 10 on of these? I mean, you can't even read these, right? I won't bother reading them. But applications, whether they're Tinder for sharks or Groupon for the Amish, the technical problems are almost always the same, right? How do I make this faster? How do I retrieve some data? How do I display it? How do I submit an order? For all of these problems, each specialty that we rely on to make us competent developers is going to offer us a different solution. And the shape of that solution that we eventually reach for reflects what we know and what we've been exposed to. Hammers are these amazing tools, but they're not the only tools. So my challenge to you, to close this up, is to look into your toolbox. What hammers are you using that you've forgotten are actually hammers and aren't really screwdrivers? What saws are you using that really aren't measuring tapes? What tools haven't you taken out and looked at in a while? What have you forgotten about? Thank you.